All right, we're on. Welcome everyone to the July live stream for supporters. 4 people, including yours truly, in the chat so far. Darth Vega, Darth Fenrir, and Clash's Pride. How are you guys doing?
Doing just fine.
We're doing all right.
Yeah, I am back from vacation, and no offense to you guys, but I kind of wish I was still there. You know how vacations are. We were talking a little bit, though, about Star Wars before we went live in the Disney Abominations. We still had not seen... hello, Scorch. We still had not seen The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, and we wanted to, but we really didn't want to, so over vacation, we watched it with the help of riff tracks, and that helped a lot. I mean, they were still long. Oh my god, those movies are way too long. Hey, Gyrator.
Did y'all hear the rumor that they're retconning?
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that some people are starting to take over. They're taking over Lucasfilms, and basically they're going to just say, you know what, that we're just going to pretend this never happened. I can imagine that. Yeah, 20 years from now, you know, if Star Wars is saved, they're going to be like, it's like, hey, remember that time when we had that female character called Rey, and the guys are like, I told you, we never talk about that. That never happened.
But I will tell you the truest line that they had that any character ever said: we have to take out the canon. You know.
Yeah, that is
Just
true.
saying.
That is true. I would like to ask the Rebel Alliance. It's like, just out of curiosity, in case the run fails, why not just go after the Death Star super laser?
But I was making a joke with the canon, and also like the extended universe being canon that they that they invalidated.
It's so funny. It's so funny though, Shane, because Kathleen Kennedy was saying, you know, it's like, oh well, we're having difficulty coming up with new ideas and stories, and I'm like, lady, you had an entire universe of books, comics, and video games you could have went to, but your company said, oh yeah, those are no longer canon because they're not made by Disney, and if it's not made by Disney, it's crap.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the real reason they got rid of, you know, the expanded universe. It wasn't because it was bad or for creative freedom. It was because Disney is infamous for taking an idea and making sure that it's their version you'll remember. There's just one little problem. There's just one little problem, is that Star Wars is not an old fairy tale that's been handed down from generation to generation with different variants. It's an established lore.
Yeah, it's a creation of George Lucas and all of the things he spawned. Yeah, but I mean, it was so much fun, you know, having the riff tracks, like when in the last movie when what's her face, you know, pulls the gun on someone, and I think it was Mike who said, "Oh, so you still have to cock lasers? Good to know."
Yeah.
Of course, in the original trilogy, lasers had recoil, so there you go.
Well, yeah, and actually in the first movie, it's even mentioned that they can jam, like, you know, because Luke, you know, was attacked by that tentacle monster. Don't get any ideas, fan fiction writers, and you know, he was begging Han to help him because he said, blast it, my gun's jammed.
Yeah. Yeah, the lasers jammed. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yes, Fishrum, we know about Vicky. No, I'm not doing that. Check a few live streams ago. I don't remember where that was, but Vicky was in the chat, and I mean, it's just...
Yeah. Well, not to mention that one response, you know, the first thing they did was they took a joke seriously, and then they got offended because you misgendered them, and your responses, and I agree, is just like, look, if you're going to get offended by a harmless joke and because I misgendered you, then you know what? You're not worth my time because... Yeah.
Well, and
reminds me...
The joke was, I was going off that helicopter meme of being thrown from a helicopter, and I mentioned, you know, if I end up being a communist, you know, do I get a helicopter ride or free helicopter ride or something like that? And he or she, I'm totally lost on the gender. I think she said she wanted to go by she. But either way, said, oh, well, that's nice. You're calling for the murder of people you disagree with. It's like, what? I just stopped it right there. Because
you know
why would a person who would do that be worth even 2 minutes of my time?
Yeah.
Oh, Scorch.
Yeah, but she was in the chat a few live streams ago and was just the most pig-headed statist. I mean, just the biggest cult mentality.
I'm just gonna call them an it. Yeah. Yeah.
Thing.
I mean, oh. Hey, Scorch, what are you doing here?
Hello, Scorch.
I think his comms down.
Seems like people are having problems with audio today.
Yeah.
By the way, speaking of Vicky, I actually watched one of their videos, and they claim to be transsexual, but they've got a very deep masculine voice, and I'm just thinking, if that's a woman, then I'm a freaking gorilla.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's just done for attention. That's kind of what it is now.
So
yeah, oh, sorry.
I'm about to change the subject. Sorry. So have y'all heard of Adam Kokesh's latest project, Garden of Freedom?
Nope.
Nope.
I kind of stopped paying attention to him when he just when he went statist.
He's trying to create his own country, his own land.
Yeah, well, I wish him better luck than the last 5 guys have had with that.
Yeah, a lot of people tried doing that.
Well, I mean, because it was like, Liberland, for example, for years or decades or whatever, it was like, I think it was Croatia was saying, nope, that's not ours. That's not ours. We don't have anything to do with that. And then as soon as the Liberland people started moving there, Croatia was like, hey, that's ours. You can't do that, and started arresting them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Although it's pretty funny.
Can you hear me now?
Like,
yes, Scorch, hello.
All right, there we go. Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
For the first time, I'm able to make one of these.
Yay. Bradley McPhee says gun control is stupid, and he also says, what about Chaz? I'm not up to speed on a lot of things that's happened in the last couple of weeks. What's been going on with Chaz?
Well, for one thing, they're becoming the very thing they hate, because they've had to set up armed patrols now and basically set up their own little police force. And a lot of people are saying,
I saw that coming.
Yeah,
I thought the Seattle police shut it down.
They have been. They're slowly taking it back. Like, basically, a lot of people are saying, you know what, screw this place. This isn't working out, and they're leaving. And people, piece by piece, are slowly taking over.
Well, I thought the police went in there and started forcefully shutting it down.
I don't know. I tried to catch up on some stories, and I got enough for the podcast,
Bradley,
and it should be a good episode.
Sorry. Hey, Bradley,
go ahead.
Are you Inquisitor? Because I know Inquisitor's last name is McPhee.
Inquisitor is Executioner, isn't he? Or are those two different guys?
I think it's different.
Okay.
Yeah, because
I don't know.
Inquisitor told me he's watching, but he can't join because he's not a monetary supporter. Oh well. McPhee. The person you need is Nanny McPhee. And I haven't seen. I remember that movie.
I don't know which one you're talking about.
It was an old movie from my thing. It was about this British lady who she's a witch, but she's also a nanny, and she shows up to people that have uncontrollable kids, and she uses her powers to teach them lessons. And when she first appears, she's ugly, but as she accomplishes more of her goals, she grows more beautiful. And a running gag in the TV show is that she magically appears in the room right next to the person scaring them. And when they say, Nanny McPhee, what are you doing here? She goes, I did knock.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a British comedy movie, so British comedies are very hit or miss with us Americans.
I love it when Brits come to our country and lecture us on things like gun control. Dude, we separated from you 200 plus years ago. Like, we don't care what you think.
And the funny irony about that is because the British weren't following their own rules. Like, they had rules in place that said, people had equal rights, they had equal property, they had access to guns and all that. And then the British were saying, yeah, because you're a colony, you don't count.
Yeah, but I mean, it was like, I forget what the number was, but it was something crazy like, 1,000 per 100,000. That was the murder rate in London before guns were even invented.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just. Yeah,
I've always heard that the gun rate didn't change. The gun murder rate didn't change after they passed the gun. Like, it stayed the same.
It really didn't, but it did change some things, like the overall number of burglaries stayed the same, but the portion of burglaries that were hot burglaries instead of cold burglaries went up. And a hot burglary is when they break in when someone's at home. So before, they were being a little more cautious about breaking in when someone was there.
They never want to talk about the unintended consequences. They're only focused on, gun deaths. Like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing that matters.
But look at stabbing deaths. They're stabbing people to death all over the place over there.
Yeah, they're starting to ban knives now. I mean, as you pointed out, there's been quite a few cases where people have been walking around, with knives you use, for cutting potatoes and carrots, and they're saying, "Oh, sorry, sir, this is a deadly weapon. I'm afraid we're gonna have to take you to the constable."
One was arrested for having a potato peeler,
which we were joking about weeks ahead of time, and then it popped up. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, once made that.
They had said, well, he couldn't show, a good reason for him to have a potato peeler, and apparently peeling potatoes isn't a good reason. I don't know.
Yeah, well, not to mention, even so, who cares? It's like people always ask, it's like, why do you need that? Why do you need that? What's the point of having that? It's like, I don't know. I'm not hurting anyone with it, so why does it matter?
What does it matter to you? Property, folks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I mean, why do you need Netflix?
Sorry. Yeah,
why do you need ice cream? Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you need a sports car?
Yeah.
Nobody needs a whiny little bitch either, but here you are.
Yeah. Why are you wearing those fancy designer clothes that cost hundreds of dollars when you can find easily better clothes, for cheap at Goodwill? But it doesn't matter, as long as it doesn't matter if you're wearing a Mark Anthony sweater, as long as you're not using it to strangle anyone, who cares?
And Bradley also mentions universal health care. There's an NHS story coming up on the podcast. So, yet another one.
There was a moment, I love it. Stephen Crowder was on some British news show, and the news anchor said, "Are you suggesting that there's such a thing as a safe gun?" And he said, "Yeah, there's a gun on my hip that's never shot anybody."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, like everyone says, the whole reason for a gun is to kill someone. Well, there are more guns in America than there are people. If the purpose of a gun was to kill someone, they're not very good at it.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah. And not to mention, they only apply that logic to the semi-auto weapons, but they completely ignore like for instance, I've got an old Lee Enfield bolt-action rifle and a Mauser rifle, and they were specifically designed to shoot and kill a rival soldier. But now I just take them. I mean, I haven't been able to go to shoot them lately because the local range, says they're too powerful for the indoor range. But I mostly use them just for shooting the heck out of it because they're fun to shoot.
Vishron says, I'm waiting for someone to get arrested for carrying a rubber penis, and the police say you can use it to batter someone.
Yeah, that's another funny thing too. Is a lot of people are saying, "Oh, that guy that attacked that person in Albuquerque, he wasn't assaulting anyone with a deadly weapon. He would just have a skateboard." It's like, almost anything could be a deadly weapon if you know how to use it and where to hit the person.
Yeah, you whack someone hard enough with a skateboard, you can kill them. But I've got an idea. Hey, you arrest someone with an egg beater because you can use it to batter someone. Get it?
Yeah.
Get it?
And Inquisitor says, to what extent should civilians be allowed to own military weapons? Like, can they own nuclear bombs? Well, it's pretty funny because people are like, oh, so you're saying we should all have nuclear bombs? Well, no, because let's face it here. Nobody except for an uber state military has a need for an atomic bomb. even a PMC would probably say, so we have this thing that can kill hundreds, if not thousands of people, possibly even more afterwards because of radiation. How's that good for us?
Well, who would even have the incentive to do it? Especially since you could make much more money, putting it into a nuclear reactor.
Yeah. I mean, heck, if I recall correctly, many of the scientists, actually regretted making the atomic bomb. They said, "Oh, we only did it because we were afraid Hitler was going to get it, and we were also afraid, that America would become fascist and would attack the Soviet Union." But when they found out that Hitler was nowhere near close, to having an atomic bomb, and Stalin was an asshole, they're like, "Oh, you know what? We're starting to regret making that thing."
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Shane, I wanted to ask you a follow-up to one of my previous AMA questions. The one about nukes being used in defense.
Yep.
What about, like, just regular military bombs or drones?
The criteria is, can it be pinpointed against aggressors? So, I mean, if it's like a bomb that, like, destroys an entire city, you're going to get a lot of innocent people in that. So,
yeah.
Oh, this is funny. Nerd Talk Live said, I was told by a cop to put out my cigar during a traffic stop. When I mentioned it to my bootlicking cousin, she said he was thinking of his safety. You could have used it as a weapon. Yeah. Tell her. Yeah, I blew some smoke in his face, and now he's at a teeny microscopic slight or high chance of getting lung cancer. Oh no.
And yes, Bradley. And when Oppenheimer saw the first nuclear explosion, he said that famous phrase, "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds." So, they didn't even really understand, how destructive it was until they saw it.
In fact, I've actually heard that when a lot of scientists saw what the bomb was, they begged, the U.S. and I even heard, the Soviets basically saying, "Please don't use this weapon. We made a mistake. This is a terrible weapon." But the military's like, "Oh no, we got to make those damn Japs surrender no matter what."
Mm-hmm.
And, it's pretty funny because I brought that up with people and they're like, "Well, Japan wasn't going to surrender. What could they have done?" And I'm like, simple. I mean, it's like you kicked them out of pretty much all the territory. All you got to do is say, "Okay, we've kicked you out. We've won. You know what'll happen if you try this again. We're leaving." Because, I mean, seriously, how are they going to rally, the people to want to go to war again,
Well, and they were surrendering. They just wanted a condition that Hirohito stay on the throne.
Yeah.
And the U.S., got puffed out all, their chest and everything because they, apparently have, tiny phalluses, and they wanted an unconditional surrender to make them, feel good or something.
I mean,
and so then they did that, and Japan surrendered, and they let Hirohito stay on the throne.
Yeah. I had a similar conversation with how the Soviet Union reacted to Germany at the end of World War II, and they're like, and a lot of people were trying to say, yeah, well, the Germans killed millions of Soviets, and I'm like, well, that doesn't matter. That doesn't make you a bigger person. And second of all, why? Once the Germans were kicked out, why didn't they stop? It's like, oh, well, they had to make sure it wouldn't happen again. And I'm like, again, how are you going to mobilize people? If our enemy just kicked you out and they don't even want to continue the war anymore, how's Hitler going to rally up people saying, "Okay, we got to go back to Russia"? Most men are going to be like, "Are you freaking crazy me? We got our butts kicked, and what's the point? They don't even want to fight. What are we doing?" Oh, it's my birthday. It's my birthday next month on the 5th. Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Nice.
Is there any merit to mutually assured destruction? Like,
no, yeah. Yeah, you know what I want to say to people that basically say, it's like, well, it's an eye. Well, we have to give an eye for an eye because, like, if the U.S. Nukes us, we should be allowed to do it because they killed so many people. And I'm like, no, how is killing? I mean, I think that's the biggest problem with humans. We are so revenge crazy. It's like, oh, someone killed our entire family, and that's true. But they're thinking, well, we need to go to that guy's place and kill his family. It's like, no, that doesn't fix anything. It just continues the cycle.
So, like, what would be
They sound familiar,
Be-
but
be-
don't know them.
Better than Orange Man and Can't Remember Anything guy.
Oh, I haven't looked at. Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
so what, Shane? What do you think is the best way to defend a country against nukes? Like some kind of technology that will shoot down a missile as it's coming toward you, or what would you say?
yeah. I've actually heard that contrary to popular belief, the Star Wars program, as it was called, it actually wasn't a bad idea, and it theoretically could, and it actually really could have worked. Although, granted, it would have taken a little bit of time, and one of the reasons why it didn't do it was because there were a lot of hardliners in the military that were saying, "Oh no, the only way we're gonna beat the Soviet Union if we go to war is we got to bomb them to smithereens before they bomb us into smithereens."
Check. Can you guys hear me now?
I can hear you perfectly fine.
They were saying in the chat they can't hear me.
Oh.
Someone in the chat tell me what was the last thing you heard from me. So Fishron asks, do I have an Xbox? I do not. So don't play Halo or Fallout or anything like that.
That the new Xbox.
I mean, if I had the time, there's lots of things I would do if I had the time, but.
Nah, Shane doesn't have an Xbox. He's got a real woman to entertain him. Yeah. Yeah, I found that. Yeah, I found that little thing, funny when you said, we still gotta wear a mask and all that. But in all honesty, me and Heather, whatever her name is, we won't be leaving the hotel room very long.
Nah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we did go out, but I mean, just
be sure that when you did it, you were very quiet because those hotel walls, they're very thin.
Well, I think they were only like opening up like a fourth of the hotel rooms or something. So there was no one around us on any side. They were doing what restaurants are doing. It's like, okay, you can sit in seat number 1, but seat number 2 has to be unoccupied, then seat number 3, and so on. And I don't think there's really anyone who's going out to hotels right now. They're pretty much hunkering down.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they can just spread people around and.
Yeah, so you and Heather were probably one of the very few people there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only other people there were a couple of people who are staying there on work, because I do know a lot of people live in hotels for work-related issues, especially in construction.
So better than Orange Man. Yeah, I don't think I really said much since then until someone said they couldn't hear me.
Yeah. So better than Joe. Wait a minute, is Jo Jorgensen a woman?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere that she kind of made an oopsie when she made a comment that sounded like she was supporting Antifa and BLM.
No. People are taking her out of context all over the place. Like there was one time because and I forget exactly what the sentence was, but she said, must, like, if you want to do something, you must do this. And they were trying to make must out to sound like, a law, which he wasn't advocating for. Oh, well, must. She wants to tell you what to do. She's not a real libertarian. I don't know.
Yeah.
What's our nickname for Joe Biden?
Sleepy Joe.
Joey Jojo Jr. Shabadoo.
Creepy Uncle Joe.
You get that? Anyone get that reference? Yeah. I've got this friend. Oh, what's his name? Joey Jojo Jr. Shabadoo? That's the worst name I ever heard. Wait, Joey Jojo, come back!
A lot of people are calling Jo Jorgensen Jojo. Because her first name is Joe and her last name starts with Joe. So, Brian, Jojo, I'm in Charlotte area, not Greensboro. I haven't lived in Greensboro for like 25 years or something like that.
Can we play the sexist card if people say they're not going to vote for Joe?
Sure, why not?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty. That'd be a perfectly good PC scenario. I can imagine PC Prince will say, "It's like, look, I don't know. I don't want to vote for Jo Jogan Sir because I politically disagree with her. But if I don't vote for her, then I'm a misogynist who doesn't want a woman in power."
She is the only candidate that doesn't have a sexual assault allegation against her.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Yep. Yeah, and there was something else, like she said that she was saying Black Lives Matter, supporting Black Lives Matter, the movement, not the organization, which is different. So.
Yeah, because sadly, if I recall correctly, BLM was a tragic case of a legitimate movement that started as a legitimate, but then it got hijacked by political radicals because it simply started out as a movement to end, racism within certain police departments because that was going on. But then some neo-Black Panthers took it over and turned it into a Black supremacy group.
Well, it started out as just a hashtag, and the hashtag, and so to ride the popularity on the hashtag, those couple of women founded Black Lives Matter who called themselves trained Marxists, and the guy who trained them was actually part of a terrorist organization. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty funny because like that one lady who was like the co-founder of the original Black Panthers, it's pretty funny because it's like they're talking about how she was a hero and was fighting for social justice and all that, and I look it up and I'm like, yeah, and she's also wanted for multiple charges of murder and acts of terrorism,
Oh, is that you mean the one that fled the country?
Yeah, the one who's currently living in Cuba.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what does it mean when an organization is declared a terrorist organization? They just lose certain rights, or like when Trump declared Antifa to be a terrorist organization? What exactly does that mean legally?
I'm actually not sure. I'm not a lawyer.
I guess from what's been going on now, basically it means that if you're caught, participating in the group, while they can't necessarily arrest you, they can pull you over for questioning now.
No,
they can
lock you up without questions or anything.
I don't think they can lock you up, but they can break up your meetings and gatherings and things like that.
They can. Like if you show up and you announce that you're with Antifa, they basically can say, "Yep, you're automatically not and to the U.S. federal government's defense, just to play the devil's advocate, Antifa hasn't been doing a good job of trying to prove they're not a terrorist organization. Is that
Andrew Esposito, Brian? That he was a cool guy. I haven't seen him in 30 years or something.
Well, I know there's been reports about people being picked up by police and the military just off the street if they're wearing Antifa clothing, and then just arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's like they can do the same thing if you're wearing gang colors. Yeah. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, creepy Uncle Joe and the double-barreled shotgun. And what was really stupid about that was he was like, you don't need something, as powerful as an AR-15. You just need a 12-gauge shotgun. A 12-gauge shotgun is probably, 50 times as powerful as an AR-15.
There was that one guy that posted a video saying all you need is a 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun, and it was showing all these pictures of women firing them, and like 90% of the time the woman either broke their shoulders or the gun flew out of their face, but then it showed them
they fell backwards. Yeah,
then it showed them firing the AR-15, and they could handle it very good.
A lot of women actually like the AR-15.
Blow apart at point blank range.
Yeah, a lot of women actually like the AR-15, so I mean, isn't it sexist then to be against the AR-15?
Yeah.
Since it's the gun of choice of so many women?
Yeah.
Are you seriously suggesting our leaders don't know what they're talking about?
Perish the thought.
You know what else peeved me off about Joe Biden and a lot of those politicians when they said that? It's like they're always talking like it's like, why do civilians need a weapon like that? And I'm like, yeah, it's easy for you to say. You've got a secret army of police and special forces and tuxedos ready to bail you out if someone even sneezes on you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of celebrities too, they're going off about, oh, you don't need guns while they walk around with armed guards,
Yeah.
There's this meme that I love. It's like gun control is the most white privilege idea ever. That it's the equivalent of saying just have the maid do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the history of it.
And and another thing I hate from gun control people is they always say that, oh, well, people use the Second Amendment to arm, the slave, trackers and all that. I'm like, yeah, and you want to know why escaped slaves couldn't defend themselves? Because many governments broke the Second Amendment and said, oh yeah, everyone has the right to keep and bear arms, except for black people, even if they're free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, they either just flat out banned it, or they did something more shady and they said, oh yeah, blacks, they can own guns, but they have to get a license, they have to come up here, they gotta visit, the Department of whatever, file out a form, lose that file, find it again, and refile it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think it might have been Solomon Northrop was saying that, like, they're passing all these laws to stop us free blacks from owning guns on the theory that if we got them, we'd give them to the slaves, and they're right. That's exactly what they would do.
Yeah.
Minneapolis, they abolished the police force and then used taxpayer funds to give themselves private security. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what else is pretty funny about this whole defund the police thing? It's like everyone's saying, oh yeah, we need to get rid of the police. And then when armed civilian militia show up, they're like, oh my God, it's the fascist militia. Someone call the cops. Someone call the cops.
Yeah, Brian, the original reason for a marriage license was to stop blacks from marrying whites.
Yeah.
George Washington did not have a marriage license.
Yep.
Mostly you just like you wrote it down in the family Bible, and that was your documentation of and that was all you had to do to get married. And contrary
to what some of the conservatives say, historically speaking, marriage was almost never about love. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
I mean,
because traditionally in Europe, you married so that wealthy families could increase their wealth, or a less wealthy family could obtain the wealth from the, and then what you would do is you married for that and to have heirs, and then you took on a mistress for love.
Oh yeah, yeah. So. Well, yeah, that's what a lot of kings did, and I've actually heard,
well, that's who Madame de Pompadour was.
Yeah. And it's pretty funny because we see a lot of cases, and it's like, wow, look at this king cheating on the queen, and I'm like, yeah, well, you know what? It wasn't unheard of for queens, to cheat on the king, and they often, knew about it and usually didn't care as long as as long as the lover didn't try to conspire to overthrow the other one.
Yeah, I mean, they generally got along with the mistresses. It was a very open thing.
Yeah.
Ben Franklin wrote an essay on how to choose the perfect mistress.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why, I think there was actually an anthropological study that have proven that, yes, having a two-parent household is the ideal scenario when it comes to sex and other stuff like that. Humans are not meant to be sexually monogamous, when it comes to children, yeah, the two-parent household is enough, but when it comes to love, there's nothing wrong with having a fling here and there as long as both parties are aware of it and they consent to it,
Bradley, thoughts on when politicians say we need background checks and arguing that the current ones don't work because they don't take into account mental status and criminal status? Yes, they do. And I've thought about this before. You smoke a doobie in college and get arrested for it, and you're on a background list and can't get a gun. And Liberty Doll just put up a really good video talking about the mental health checks that are already in place that stop so many people from getting guns unnecessarily.
I love it that these reporters are trying to prove how easy it is to get a gun, and then they go and try to buy a gun and they get denied because of something in their past.
There was that one reporter who was very respected and all that, and he was trying to prove how easy it was to get an AR-15. And when he tried to buy it, he was denied. And then it was revealed that the reason why he was denied was because years ago, he beat up his wife and was charged for domestic battery.
Or they just lie about it like Michael Moore in Bowling for Columbine. He had ordered a gun and got it through, an FFL and had filled out all the paperwork and everything, had done all that beforehand. And then when he went to pick it up, he brought his camera crew with him and made it look like he just walked in and then walked out, 30 seconds later with a gun, and that's not how it happened.
I saw a counter response like that where a guy went to the bank where he got it from, and they explained and showed proof that despite what Michael Moore said, we didn't just hand it to him right then and there. Once he opened up an account with us and deposited $1,000, we said, okay, if you want the gun, we'll have we're gonna have a background check. We're gonna take a look. We'll take a look through your background check. And after that, they went through the background check and said, okay, you're approved and your gun's arrived. And Michael Moore said, oh, and can you hand it to me when I get there? And they said, well, okay, we don't see a problem with that.
And Cinema Fan, what do you think about?
One reporter was trying to do a illegal thing, showing off that you can do this so easily, and then they got arrested.
Yeah. I also remember. Oh, sorry.
Well, Cinema Fan is saying, what about people calling Joe Jorgensen a Marxist or communist for a pro-BLM tweet? Again, she was talking about, it's ridiculous. She was talking about the movement.
About that earlier.
Yeah, and the thing is, 95% of the protesters, maybe even more, aren't part of the BLM organization. They're protesting because they have some pretty gall-darn good reasons to protest.
Because most of the libertarians have been saying this too.
When it's traditionally us libertarians that have been pointing out the problems with police abuse for decades, and finally now it's getting some airplay.
The Inquisitor said, a friend of his, he pointed out that civilians often use, to stop mass shootings all the time. And apparently his friend he showed the study to said, no, the study actually says highly trained citizens with guns know how to use it, but not average civilians. And I would like to counter, I actually read somewhere that actually found out that the average gun owner, like civilian gun owner, they actually have slightly better firearms training than the police, and even in some cases the military.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you go, basically, it's hardly the case that people, just go and buy a gun and leave. Which gun are you going to get and things like that, and they're going to, talk with the dealer about that, and the dealers will generally have firing ranges that they can try out different guns with and things like that. And so...
Yeah, the range I go to, they require you to go through a safety training course before you can have your hands on a gun.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of states are doing that. They're saying you can get a gun, but you have to, go through training and whatnot. And that's another thing too, because they're always afraid. It's like, oh, but if we allow people, to carry guns, it's going to be like the Wild West, and people are going to shoot each other over, road rage. And I'm like, we're already seeing that with the cops and to a lesser extent the military,
Bradley, how were they professionally trained civilians? Because he was looking at all of them. He didn't exclude, anyone who stopped it. That's...
And isn't it true that's... Sorry, go ahead.
And I was about to say, even if it is true, even if you do claim that it's too easy for mass shooters to get a hold of guns, let me ask you this. Why do they always go to the place that often have signs that says no firearms allowed permitted on the premise, like schools?
Yep.
Isn't it true that some of these gun control cities require you to get training, but they also disallow training centers in their cities?
Or they'll do things like, it
That's
has to
22.
be it has to be a special, training session, and they only offer it for 1 hour every 2 weeks or something like that, and there are only so many slots, and they're basically impossible to get into.
Or as John Stossel pointed out, when he tried to buy a simple handgun, for his thing, he showed that in many areas of New York, you not only have to go through training, but you also have to have, a basically you have to have a statement of need saying why you need this gun,
And people giving him death threats was not a good enough reason.
Oh yeah. He pointed that out. He pointed out, it's like, look, I'm a reporter and I say a lot of stuff, and after I told stuff about people, I've had all these, death threats. Now I do agree most of them, are BS, but still, I'm an old guy, I'm in New York, and there are periods where I'm alone, I wouldn't mind having a gun, and the police are like, yeah, that's not good enough.
Well, there is a very simple solution. Just be Donald Trump and have a bunch of money. And
Well, yeah,
yeah,
he pointed that out in that same skit. It's like, it's like a lot of these people, who go in there. I mean, there was even an ex-military guy that was denied a gun permit, and he was like, it's like the police were asking him like, oh yeah, we just want to make sure you know how to use it. And he's like, I was in the military handling multi-million-dollar equipment. I can handle a small little handgun.
And Brian is talking about how ammo is getting expensive, and that's by design. All sorts of restrictions on it and taxes, and not only importation, but how you can't take them across state lines without a bunch of permits and things like that.
I know. That's the reason why I'm still stuck doing dominoes, because I had this interesting idea for a business, that I think could work, if I had the resources and the legality, which is to buy ammo here in Wisconsin, which is relatively cheap compared to other states, and mail it over. But unfortunately, because of government laws, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I could, but I'd have to set up connections with questionable people, and I don't want to do that.
Or buy this huge legal team to try and make sure you're going through all the loopholes and everything.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. They pass all these laws, and then people are like, why are all these big corporations hiring legal teams, and why are all these black market people popping up? It's like, because it's still a popular in-demand item, and when you do something like that to restrict its trade, that's what people do. They either hire legal lobbyists to start lobbying the government, or they start, going to questionable people. Like, we're actually seeing this with cigarettes, ironically. States are saying are more or less banning smoking, and then they're like, wait a minute, how come there's all these black market cigarettes on the streets? It's like,
Rainbow, you can 3D print ammo. They have the plans for that. Of course, you have to buy the gunpowder and the primer separately. You can't 3D print that, but yeah, other than that, they have a 3D print for ammo.
You don't even need a 3D printed gun. I mean, it's so funny because a lot of people are saying, oh, 3D printers will mean people are gonna make all these guns and explosives, and I'm just like, just look up the Molotov cocktail and the Sten gun. Yeah, the
What
Sten.
do you think?
Yeah, the
What
Sten.
do you think of? Sorry, go ahead.
I was about to say, I mean, it's like anyone who knows a thing or two about guns knows the Sten gun is the ultimate middle finger to staters who say, oh, we've got to disarm the populace. You guys are familiar with the Sten gun, right?
Yeah.
The one with the magazine in the side?
Yeah, it was that simple submachine gun made. It was developed by the British. The original intention was to make a submachine gun that was cheap, to mass produce, because they desperately needed submachine guns, and it was becoming too expensive for them to import Tommy guns. However, many anti-German resistance fighters realized, hey, we can easily make, a functional Sten gun using already readily available machine tools, and they were making Sten guns. In fact, there are accounts of the British sending in not the guns themselves, but how to make the guns to people, and people would go into their bike shops, and when the German authorities came, they'd say, oh, I'm just a humble bike maker, that's all. And they're like, okay, move along. But secretly in the back, they're making all these Sten guns for the resistance.
Can you 3D print a grenade? Yep, they got the plans for that too. Again, not the gunpowder, but as everyone who's seen the Star Trek episode Arena, it's easy to make gunpowder.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, you can't 3D print gunpowder?
Well, you don't even need gunpowder to make a grenade, and I actually told this to Inquisitor. I mean, just look at Timothy McVeigh. That guy killed over 168 people and wounded 600 others. And you know what he used? He didn't use this military grade bomb that he bought off the black market. He used a fertilizer bomb that he made out of chemicals you can easily buy at Home Depot and Menards.
Yeah, all you need is something that burns really quickly. And then you need the fuse.
He bombed for less than $5,000.
All he did, if I recall correctly, was, now don't anyone try doing this. Basically, he took like ammonium nitrate and mixed it with some type of highly volatile nitro fuel that's used for race cars. He mixed it up, put it in a pressure box, sealed it in a truck, and lit a 2-minute fuse and took out of there.
He basically made ANFO is what he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as far as the grenade's concerned, all you really need, you fill it with something. It doesn't even have to be an explosive. Because technically gunpowder isn't an explosive, it just burns really fast. So if it was something that burns really fast, and then you need the fuse in there. Fuses are easy to make. There are plans on the internet.
Fun fact about pressure cook. Oh, sorry, Shane. I was about to say.
No, but it's just like this kind of just flammable material you make, and then you soak it in yarn, and then you put it, in the oven at like 250 for a few hours, and then you've got fuses.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Shane, what are your thoughts on the Second Amendment applying to the states?
Well, what sense would it make if it didn't?
Because I've heard libertarians on both sides of that. Some say states' rights trump the Constitution. Some say
no, the supremacy clause, the Constitution trumps the states.
Yep, that's what they mean by supreme law of the land. It means, contrary to popular belief, the 10th Amendment doesn't say the states can do whatever they want. No, it only says that the states can initiate powers if it's not expressly denied in the Constitution. Like let's say if they want to pass, a tax, if it's not in the Constitution, then theoretically, they can do that. But no, they can't say, oh yeah, we don't like the Second Amendment, so we're going to ban it. No, they can't do that because it says in the Constitution, it's the supreme law of the land.
Quickly before it scrolls off the top, JC Armitage, prohibition is only for the economically illiterate. Trying to kill the supply doesn't automatically kill the demand. Yep. Very, very true.
Oh, yeah.
And Rainbow points out, a frag grenade is a special shell. That's the thing about a grenade. It's not the explosion that gets you. It's the shrapnel that it creates.
Yeah. Surprisingly, there actually are grenades out there used by both the military and police that are deliberately designed to be non-shrapnel, and they're often used for crowd control. They don't blow up and push shrapnel into your face. They just make a really loud bang and cause your ears to bleed, so you become disoriented.
Yeah, flashbangs. Yeah, they blind you and make you not hear well for a little bit.
Unless you're the FBI, then yes, your tear gas and flashbang grenades are devices because who knew the accelerant they use in tear gas is flammable.
Well, and also tear gas has to be turned into a vapor, and you need something like acetone or benzene to do that. I really love the Waco miniseries. I don't know if it was originally Netflix, but it's on Netflix now. That's where Heather and I saw it. And the radio guy at the end just said it very plainly. They're saying, the FBI claims the Davidians started the fire. The Davidians claim the FBI started the fire. We may never know the truth, so let's focus on what we do know. And he mentions a case where there was a standoff. The FBI or the police, whoever, used tear gas. And that was followed by a fire, which killed everyone. And then he mentions another time where it was standoff, tear gas, fire, death. And he keeps going on down the list. Standoff, tear gas, fire, death. Standoff, tear gas, fire, death. And then he says, then he says, the FBI knows that this happens, and yet they made no plans to put out a fire if one started.
Yeah, and
that's all you need to know.
And here's the thing, if I recall correctly, the FBI commander in charge of the Waco siege, here's another thing that Status can't deny. Even he said that while he still thought that David Koresh was a nutjob who needed to be brought to justice, he does agree, looking back now, I definitely would have done things much differently. Like, he wouldn't have, blasted their, the place with music and turned the power off and make life a living hell because the police started this false assumption, if we make him uncomfortable and sleep deprived, he'll try to surrender. It's like, no, I know from firsthand experience, when you're sleep deprived, you're not going to be more sedative and all that. You're going to be irritable and angry, and even the tiniest thing is going to set you off.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the mini series is based off two books, one that was written by one of the surviving Davidians and one that was written by one of the FBI guys. So you get it from both points of view, and it's really good.
Oh, you live in South Park?
They did kind of make it seem like Janet Reno was kind of not as culpable as maybe.
They did downplay her role in that. She had a very active role in it. So did Bill Clinton, but.
Oh yeah, and Inquisitor wants to
But
know
they
what
weren't actually there, and almost all of it was set, there around the compound. So that's what you saw.
Yeah, and Inquisitor also wants to know what are your thoughts when people say, "Oh, the Civil War was about slavery, and the South started it because they aggressively attacked Fort Sumter." I think we've discussed that before, right?
We discussed to death, yes.
Yeah,
To death.
yeah. People fail to realize Fort Sumter wasn't something that had always been there. It had been put there months ahead of time for the sole purpose of keeping an eye on Southern trade ships.
Well, it was put there because ships had to go past it to get to the port of Charleston, and Lincoln really wanted to collect the tariffs, and that's where most of the ships come in.
Yeah.
They could blockade the port and only let the ships through if they paid the tariffs. Because remember, from Lincoln's point of view, they were still one country, and the South owed the tariffs. From the South's point of view, they were a different country, and you don't pay tariffs to another country. And that was the source of it.
And here's another thing too: is people always talk about, but it had to be about slavery. What else would it be? Well, you did mention they did have a meeting. They did have a meeting of should we secede? Because they're passing all these anti-slave laws, and most of the politicians said, you know what, that's not a good enough reason to secede. And the real reason why they seceded was because of a law that was passed. I can't remember the full name of the bill, but it was basically a bill that increased tariffs on the southern states, and basically the southern states were like, yeah, screw that, we're seceding.
Well, North Carolina didn't secede until the fighting started, and they had to take a side, and the same was true with like Virginia and Tennessee and a couple others.
Oh, yeah,
but it was really interesting to look at the history of it in North Carolina, because we basically got three areas of the state: the mountains, the Piedmont, and the coastal plain. The Piedmont's where I live. Over in the coast was basically where you had the rich people with all the slaves, and to some extent the northern Piedmont. The southern Piedmont, where I lived, hardly anyone owned slaves, although you did have them. There's, in fact, a living history museum near me called Latta Plantation, and the Lattas, at their heyday in like the first decade of the 1800s, had like 33 slaves. So you had them around here, but it wasn't as much. And of course, you hardly had them in the mountains as well. And when you're just looking at all the debate between these different parts of the state and, who wanted to secede and who didn't, it really gives you the idea of what was happening across the South. Because, people point to South Carolina seceding over slavery and Alabama and things like that. That's because there were so many rich, powerful slave owners, they basically controlled the politics of the state. But where you have states where that wasn't as much of a factor, like North Carolina and Tennessee and Virginia, they had debated earlier in the year whether to secede over slavery and decided not to. And like I said, they only seceded later when the fighting started.
Yeah. And here's another thing I want to ask people who say the Civil War was all about slavery and it was all about the states' rights to keep their slaves. It's like, okay, then how come Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, and West Virginia stayed and fought for the Union even though they had slavery?
Well, Maryland we don't actually know about, because during their debate whether or not to secede, Lincoln sent in the troops into the House of Burgesses, or whatever it was called, their state legislature, sent in the troops and basically arrested the pro-slavery people before they could vote, and so they voted to stay in the Union, basically under force.
Yeah. Well,
because Virginia had already seceded. If Maryland seceded, Washington, D.C. is right on the border between the two. That would have been a problem if Maryland had seceded.
Yeah, and actually, if I recall, another good example of a state that only seceded because of Northern aggression, because a friend of mine who was from Texas told me this was Texas. When the Civil War first broke out, Texas actually wanted to stay with the Union and wanted no part of it. But after they heard stories of what the Union was doing to the southern states, they were basically like, yeah, you know what? This isn't what we signed up for when we joined the United States. We're not going to accept it.
Yeah, well, their secession document mentions that, but it also talks a lot about slavery, and it is pretty hideously racist. So I'm not going to do any apologetics for them. But it was after the fighting started.
Yeah, yeah, that's another thing too. Is like they always talk about. It's another thing, and this is a sin that Simon Whistler did. He was talking about history, about the myth, and he actually said that that there was a clause within the Confederate States Constitution that said that slaves could never ever be free. And I looked it up, and no, it's not true. And in fact, it flat out, I think there was actually a clause within the Confederate Constitution that said if a black man who was previously a slave is freed, he's permanently free and can't be captured and resold again.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, there was abolitionists within the South, and it was a growing movement in the South. The only difference, in fact, many Southern states weren't against the idea of abolishing slavery. They just were against the federal government stepping in and doing it. They felt that should be up to the states to decide. And to an extent,
well, I mean, read what Lysander Spooner had to say about it. He was one of the biggest abolitionists, but completely against the war. Although he wasn't against, he actually called for guerrilla warfare and arming slaves, and every time there was a slave auction or whatever, or invading plantations to free the slaves and things like that. He was all for that, but he wasn't for sending in an army to wage war against everyone.
Well, there was a guy that tried doing that, John Brown. He tried to start a slave revolt by arming slaves and all that. And guess who stopped him? The federal government.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because that was illegal. You can't do that. That's the law. Yeah. People don't understand. The law supported slavery.
Oh yeah, and even though the North and South were at war, the Fugitive Slave Act was still enforced, and if escaped slaves came from the South, came to the North and said, "Hey, we ran away from our masters," the Northern authorities would arrest them and send them back to the South and say, "Hey, we found your slave."
Mm-hmm. It was crazy.
That's why.
Because remember, their point of view was it was still the same status quo as it was in 1860. They're still the states and all the same laws apply.
Yeah, I read a lot about the Civil War, surprisingly, so I know a lot of bullshit. And it's another one that's kind of even though I sympathize with the Confederacy, I still think it's bullshit, is the alternate history of saying, oh, if the British had supported the Confederacy, the U.S. would have lost. And I'm like, no, the British, yes, they were dependent on the South for cotton, but they also had an economic advantage to the North. And second of all, the U.S. had a shit ton of allies. We were allied with Russia. We were allied with the Prussians. The Austrians supported us. If the British got involved, it would have resulted in basically a 19th century World War I. And the British were not going to risk that. Yeah, they were not stupid. They knew if they picked a side in the Civil War, it wasn't going to end badly. So their general policy is we'll recognize the Union and we'll keep an eye on the South and see what happens.
Yeah, take care, Brian. And in case you're watching the rest of this live stream later, yes, my birthday is at the end of the month. So I thought I said that, but sorry if you missed it.
Yeah.
I'll just say happy birthday now because I probably won't get a chance to say it before then. So happy birthday, Shane.
Thank you.
I mean, and speaking of the Civil War, I ain't gonna lie. One thing that kind of irks me within some libertarian fields is that people are acting like, oh, there's a civil war coming on. It's going to be the apocalypse and everything. And it's like, now, don't get me wrong. I think something big will happen, but it's not going to be like what people think. It's not going to be fire and brimstone falling from the sky. As the old saying goes, it's not going to come with a bang, but a whimper,
Mm-hmm. And Bradley, slavery would have killed the Confederacy's economy. That was one big thing that was fueling the abolitionist movement, because in every movement you have the principled people at the core of it, but that's never enough to keep the movement going. You got to reach beyond that. And what the abolitionists were doing was saying to people like, hey, why should all these because it was rich people who had slaves, why should these rich people get to keep their slaves when you have to work for a living? Why should they be able to get all this free labor? And they were pointing out the destruction it was doing to the economy and how much better their lives would be, if the slaves were free.
Even in today, even in places where slavery is still enforced, it's not like they're bought and sold. Contrary to what they say, most modern day slaves today aren't bought and sold. Rather, they're held at gunforce. A perfectly good example is a lot of the slavery that still goes on in Africa. It's not that there's a slave market where people are being bought and sold. Rather, it's, the government or radical militias coming in, taking a village and saying, okay, now you're under control of our group, so now you have to be our servants, and if you don't, we're going to kill your family and burn down your field.
Well, that's how it's always been. That's how the Asani got their slaves, and the Europeans buying slaves from them, I think it was kind of a new idea. But they're like, hey,
Yeah.
you want to give us gold for slaves? Sure, we'll make that trade.
But
they didn't have a slave market of their own that they were buying and selling. They were just conquering people and enslaving them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I hated about that one Family Guy episode where Peter's explaining his history, and it's revealed he has a black, ancestor. He portrays his black ancestor as living in Africa, but then he's kidnapped by a white guy, because after doing real research, you find out that, contrary to popular belief, that never happened. It was almost always usually the people were already enslaved, usually by a local, African tribal war chief, and like you said, the whites would come in and say, hey, we want slaves. If we give you guns and cigarettes, will you give us, your slaves? And they were like, okay.
Yeah, Bradley, slavery did not make America rich. America would have been a lot richer if it hadn't been for slavery. And I think that's pretty much a consensus of economists across every school of economics.
By the way,
I don't know of anyone who seriously disputes that.
And by the way, I hated that meme that popped up where they're comparing, George Washington to Vladimir Lenin. And they say, oh, George Washington was a privileged man who had all these slaves and all that. It's like, yeah, but his family were hard workers, And here's the thing: George Washington didn't buy the slaves; he inherited them from his father.
I thought they were dower slaves. He got them when he married Martha.
Yeah, that's what I heard. That's what I heard. Many of the founding fathers, yes, they had slaves, but they didn't actually buy the slaves themselves. In most cases, like you said, it was either they inherited them from their father, or they got it as the form of a dowry, basically for saying, okay, for marrying my daughter, you get this plantation, which just happened to have slaves. And by the way, I think they seem to ignore was that when George Washington passed away, his final thing in his will was all his slaves were to be set free, and he was to guarantee that they wouldn't be captured and sold.
Yeah, and by the time Thomas Jefferson died, they had closed that loophole. People need to understand this. It wasn't that, like, if you had slaves, you couldn't just declare that they were free and let them go. The legal term is manumission. And if you read up on all the restrictions on that, it was basically impossible to free a slave.
Yeah, that's the reason why a lot of our founding fathers, even though they hated slavery, most of them, they still held on to them, because like you said, you just couldn't free them, because if you announce, okay, you're all free, and set them in on their merry way, all that would happen is they would be captured by people who liked slavery and just be put back into slavery. There had to be some type of legal document that they had on their person that said, I am a free man and I'm not available for capture and reselling.
Yeah, and getting that document, there was all sorts of things going on, and it depended on the state and what state you're moving to.
And by the way,
Bradley asks, is it true founding fathers like Jefferson wanted to end slavery? The very first act of the U.S. Congress was an act introduced by Thomas Jefferson, which would have ended slavery throughout America and its territories in perpetuity, and it failed by one vote.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, that's how close it was from the beginning to Civil War. It was pretty much divided right down the middle. Half the people wanted slavery, half the people wanted to abolish it.
Yeah. And even then, from what I've heard, the people who wanted to keep their slaves, it wasn't exactly because white man good, black man a bunch of guerrillas. I mean, it probably was an underlying reason, but the main reason wasn't because us whites are the superior Ubermen. It was rather because it's like, well, my family comes from a long line of prestigious, we come from prestige, and if we have to give up these slaves, we have to give up, our status.
Well, and this is one of the thing that kind of hits you when you read 12 Years a Slave, which everyone should read. When he's finally freed, they finally try. I mean, you can read the book and see all the back and forth that went. Him trying to reach out and send letters, and them, in New York trying to find him in Louisiana. But when they finally do it, and you're kind of ready from the guy who's owned him as a slave all this time. You're kind of ready for a fight from him. It's like, no, you can't have my slave. In actuality, as soon as he found out that Solomon was a free man and he was born free, he was horrified. He didn't say like, oh no, this is an inferior black person and we get to enslave him. It was a legal thing. The law says these people are slaves, these people are free. And he was actually horrified to learn that he'd been enslaving a free man all this time.
Oh.
Not horrified to enslave the rest of them because that was the legal status. So
yeah,
that's what the religion of statism does.
Yep. Yeah, it's just a bunch of.
They pretty much all, I think, were sold by other Africans. I mean, it may have happened, but for the most part, at least as far as I know, the way Europeans got African slaves was that they bought them mostly from the Asante, when they had their empire going.
And here's another thing that that BLM activists ignore is that, contrary to popular belief, the blacks were not the go-to slaves. I mean, historically speaking, the Europeans would, who they enslaved? They enslaved other Europeans. That's where the word Slavic
primarily
comes from,
Irish.
because
those dirty Catholics.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's another thing too, is that a lot of Europeans were enslaved in America, mostly Irish Catholics and Germanic and Polish Jews. They just weren't called slaves, they were called quote unquote indentured servants, which SJW's like, oh no, that's completely different. No, it pretty much, like,
they actually had a phrase for Irish people who were Barbadosed, as in a past tense verb. That's the word for Irish who were basically kidnapped and enslaved in Barbados. So look that up. That is not indentured servitude. That absolutely is slavery.
I looked it up, and the only difference between indentured servitude and slavery is basically how you ended up. Enslavement usually meant you were captured by usually a state government and then sold to someone else, whereas with an indentured servitude, you became a slave basically because someone pressured you or forced you to, not exactly by
there was a lot of proper indentured servitude, going on, because people like when my ancestors came over to America, coming over from Germany, they had basically their grandparents had lost everything in the 30 Years' War, and they basically had nothing, which means they didn't have money for passage. So the idea was they'd get passage and then they'd have to work it off. And so that's what the indentured servitude is. They're working off a debt, and once they were working off that debt, they could come and settle in North Carolina.
Yeah, basically, that's what you're saying. Basically, it's like you would go to someone who owns land and say, look, we lost everything, but we want to come to America and have a life. And if you let us come to America and give us some money, for the next couple years, we'll work for free for you. And that's usually what it was. And in all honesty, if that's how it was, I'm not against that. The only problem was with a lot of indentured servants, a lot of people did often, abuse that law and basically put in a clause, and contrary to what Simon Whistler said, no, you were not given basic human rights. You were often, like, if you got a crappy, indentured servitude contract, it basically said you and your family are my servants, until I say so, basically.
And it was worse under Oliver Cromwell. I think that's when most of the Irish were enslaved and sent over. But the thing is, like, when they would send, an Irishman to Barbados or wherever in that area, and they'd work him on the field, something like half of them will be dead within 5 years.
Yeah.
Because they just can't take work in that kind of environment. That was why they turned to black slaves.
Yeah.
Because black slaves were more physically capable of.
And by the way, SJWs and liberals, that's where the term redneck comes from. It comes from Irish slaves who were forced to work in the fields, and because, like you said, their bodies were adjusted to a temperate environment, so they weren't used to the extreme heat. They would burn up in the hot sun because their skin couldn't handle all that sunlight, so they would turn red, and their masters would call them rednecks because of it.
And if anything, Bradley, they were treated worse because, I mean, yes, black people, according to them, were, an inferior race, but at least they weren't filthy Catholics. Oh yeah. Man, did they hate Catholics. Do not underestimate how much they hated Catholics.
They fought a war against Catholics, so.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And here's another thing too. Once slavery became officially legal, generally speaking, most people really didn't mind blacks initially. They thought they were okay, and they said, okay, fine, I may not like them, but hey, if their money's green and they got it legally, I'll take it. Not the same with a lot of Irishmen. It wasn't unheard of for Irish people to try to go in for a job or to get money, and for the owner to say, hey, get your Catholic butt out of here.
They would actually have signs, even on into the 19th century, and upwards of the Civil War, or even after, I think, they would have signs that say, no Irish need apply.
And I think it's the same with Italians, right?
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
The
Italians and
Italians
Germans. Yep.
Yeah. Well, the Germans mainly because many Germans that came to America were Jewish, and they were trying. And many Germans came to America because they didn't like Otto von Bismarck and him uniting Germany. Because the thing is, they were okay with the united Germany. The problem was Otto von Bismarck wanted it to be a Prussian centrist Germany, whereas a lot of Bavarians wanted Germany to be united, kind of like the United States. But Otto von Bismarck was like, nope, when we're united, we're still going to have the monarchy, and the Prussians are going to be in charge. They're going to be running everything. Yeah, so many of them basically said, well, screw you, we're going to America. And fun fact, at one point, the second most common language spoken in America was German.
And we were told the children of indentured servants were never considered slaves. Well, if they were proper indentured servants, like I said, then that's true. But if they were the Irish that were Barbados, they absolutely were, especially if it was a female Irish and the master raped her and produced a child.
And here's another thing about Ireland too. Fun fact, the Bank of America, when it was first founded, it was actually called the Bank of Ireland, and it was founded because a rich Irishman came to America. I mean, I don't know if he was rich, I can't remember the founder, but he was shocked to discover that Irish people were struggling, to set up their own businesses because they couldn't get loans. Every time they went in saying, hey, I want to be a blacksmith, but I need a loan to buy the equipment I need, the bank would just say, get out of here. So he basically said, well, you know what? I'll give you the loan. Yeah, that's what Bank of America started out. It started out as a group called the Bank of Ireland, and it was designed to give, Irish Catholics, and to a lesser extent, German Jews, funds, because the other banks wanted nothing to do with them. Actually, Shane, going back to anti-Catholicism, I even read that when JFK first ran for presidency, a lot of people were scared because they're like, oh no, he's a Catholic and he's going to let the Pope determine what America does. And Kennedy had to say, look, I am a dedicated Catholic, but I will not let the Pope influence my decisions.
Oh yeah, that was a big controversy, him being Catholic. I mean, and it wasn't the case. I mean, you had the word Christian, but Christians didn't really identify under that umbrella. They identified as Catholic, Methodist, Baptist, and stuff like that. I think it wasn't really until like the 60s and 70s, especially when they started getting together into the moral majority, that you really had this idea of them identifying as, Christians across the board.
Well, yeah, I mean... Yeah, Shane, you said you grew up as, what was it, a Methodist or a Baptist?
Yep, Methodist.
Oh. Are the Methodists
United Methodist.
Are the Methodists the one that, when they baptize you, they literally give you a bath or something?
No, that's Baptists.
Okay, yeah.
Methodists do the sprinkling.
Yeah.
And that is the butt of so many jokes around here.
Yeah, you told me that one joke about how a popular joke is, a police officer comes across a Baptist minister giving a young boy putting a young boy in water and scrubbing him, and the officer's is like, sir, what are you doing? Why are you bathing that? Why are you giving that poor boy a bath? And the minister's like, I'm not bathing him, I'm baptizing him.
Yeah, and there's another joke. I'm probably not going to tell this very well, but the Baptist minister wants to save the Methodist minister and get him baptized, and says, well, you need to be properly baptized, and so he says, okay, and he starts to go into the water, and he goes in ankle deep, and he's like, is this enough? It's like, no, you have to get in deeper. And he goes in hip deep. Is this enough? No, you got to get in deeper. Gets in chest deep and so on. And then he goes down and ducks in just to where his forehead and above is sticking out. And then he sticks his head back up and says, is that enough? And the Baptist says, no, it's the top part that counts.
Yeah. Actually, one person told me this one Baptist joke one time that says a couple who used to be Methodist, but now they're Baptist, but before they can properly get baptized, they're on a vacation. So they contact the minister because they're flying over the Atlantic Ocean, and they're like, hey, minister, just if it's possible, could you bless the Atlantic Ocean? And he's like, well, why is that? Well, just in case if the plane crashes while we're over the Atlantic Ocean, we want to be baptized when we die. Yeah. I mean, hey, by religious standards, almost any body of water can become holy water.
Yep, you just have to bless it.
Yep, a bottle of Dasani can be holy water. Actually, I saw a cheap B horror movie where they killed these demons by doing that because if they touch holy water, they turn to stone. And they realized, wait a minute, all holy water is just any water that's been blessed by a priest. So what they do is they lure them into a building, turn on the sprinklers, and then they have a priest perform the ritual to basically automatically make the sprinkler water holy water, and all the demons get soaked and they turn to stone.
I remember.
Yeah, I mean the baptismal at our church, they just filled it up from the tap. That's all they did.
Mm-hmm.
I remember there was a Super Bowl commercial years ago. It was making fun of Catholic communion, and it had Doritos chips.
Oh yeah, that one. And fun fact, and the angry video game nerd was a cameo in there. He played, he was one of the guys that was getting impatient because he was wondering where his Doritos were. I saw that commercial.
And then like on the next day on Fox News, some Catholic priest got on there and started complaining about I saw that one. It was pretty funny. It's how they're trying to get back people in, and they're handing out nacho cheese flavors. It's like body of Christ. And one guy's like, Cool Ranch, other line. Yeah. The body of Christ is nacho cheese or Cool Ranch flavored Doritos, and the blood of Christ is Pepsi Zero or whatever.
But according to the Catholics, you cannot take communion unless you are a Catholic. When one of my closest friends got married, he married a Catholic, and they had a Catholic ceremony, and I was one of the groomsmen. And so they did the whole communion thing, but those of us who weren't Catholic, we were just touched with the wafer. We couldn't actually take and eat it. It was only the Catholics who could take it and eat
Thoughts
it.
Thoughts on the Confederate flag? Is it racist? No.
It's a piece of cloth. A piece of cloth cannot be racist.
Not to mention what many people call the Confederate flag wasn't the Confederate flag. The Confederate flag, it had many different forms, but the final form was basically a white flag with a Union Jack off to the side and a red stripe at the bottom.
Yeah, the Confederate flag that people think of is the flag of the Tennessee Army.
Yeah.
But there were all sorts of variations.
Yeah.
Like the Virginia Army was very similar, except it was square and things like that.
Well, yeah, fun fact, I mean, a lot of people, like to show the Tennessee battle flag, fighting, with the U.S. flag, but actually the U.S. battle flag didn't look like, this traditional stars and stripe. It was actually a flag, and all the stars were arranged in a circle.
Shane, you know that racism just means something I don't.
Yeah. That's the only way they got the Dukes of Hazzard off by calling it racist, was because they had the flag on top of the General Lee, and it's probably one of the least racist shows that's ever been on television. We've talked about this before, but man.
Yeah, we talked about this I think last month.
Not to mention General Lee wasn't a racist, and he actually condemned slavery.
Yeah, he was an abolitionist.
Yeah.
Whereas General Grant was a slave owner. Granted, not for long. He did free them, but he got. I don't know if he inherited them or if they were dower slaves or something. But Grant was a slave owner. Lee was an abolitionist.
Yeah, the funny irony is that Robert E. Lee was actually against the South initially, and he was actually pro-Union. In fact, had Northern Virginia not seceded, he would have had General Grant's job.
Mm-hmm. Because they offered it to him, but then when Virginia seceded, he said, I can't go against Virginia. That was in his mind. That's what he was fighting for. He was fighting for Virginia.
Yeah, And then they gave it, so they gave the role to General McClellan, and anyone who reads history knows what good of a man McClellan was. Yeah. Yeah, basically,
basically anything the North did, if someone did it today, it'd be called war crimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Granted, there was plenty of that on the southern side too, so I'm not claiming one side's any better, but man, that's why
I once jokingly, because we were talking about the Dukes of Hazzard with some friends, and it's like, hey, what would happen if I got a blue sedan and painted a northern battle flag on it and called it the General Sherman? And he's like, that sounds cool, but don't bring it down to the South, because if people figured out what you named it, they will destroy it, because in many parts of the South, especially Georgia, General Sherman is not liked.
No.
Just look up Sherman's March to the Sea and see what a terrible person he was.
Yeah.
I live actually in Georgia. I live in just north of Atlanta, and my best friend is, well, his username on Instagram was CSA_libertarian, if that tells you anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
but yeah, it was basically a scorched earth thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Though I
and he would also do things like he would say, now, we're coming through town, but if you want to be safe and you want to show us that you're nonviolent, just gather in the town hall and we'll know that everyone who's gathered there is peaceful. And of course, everyone gathered in the town hall, and then he torched the town hall.
Yeah. Though I ain't gonna lie, I do admire the fact that he was able, to lead and basically live off the land, basically. But of course, another thing too that he often.
Well, he was marching through farmland where he could just grab whatever crops he wanted, so it's not impressive.
I have heard that while most of his crimes were exaggerated, he still did some bad stuff. And actually, going back to what you said, another common strategy he would do is he would say, listen, just go all the town hall, I promise I won't burn it down. And he wouldn't burn it down, and he said, okay, it's safe to leave. And then they would come up and they'd find out, wait a minute, where's all our food, flour, and ammunition and all that? And he's like, oh, I took it because the Union Army needs it more than you do.
Well, and what people don't understand is they were killing slaves too.
Oh yeah.
People have this image of, Union troops coming through the South freeing slaves right and left. No, they were killing them. Yeah. They were killing the slaves just like they were killing everyone else. It was completely indiscriminate.
Oh yeah. And I mean, the thing is, even General Sherman himself said it. Many people confronted him saying, it's like you did all this bad stuff. And he said, yeah, I'll admit I did that, but that's war. Despite what all these politicians are telling you, we're not fighting. When we go to war, we're not fighting, for the good or evil. We're fighting, for our side, and we have to do what it takes to win, basically.
Thoughts on the tearing down of Columbus's statue? A statue is a hunk of bronze. Leave it up, tear it down. I don't care. Just don't do it as an angry mob.
Yeah,
I don't like angry mobs. I'm funny that way.
And not to mention, don't tear down a statue unless you actually know about the person you're tearing down. Because, like, I've heard stories that they're trying to tear down, statues of Frederick Douglass, and I'm like, do you not know who Frederick Douglass is? And they're like,
well, and there are other abolitionists that they were tearing down.
Yeah.
It's crazy. They don't even know.
They just see a statue and they think racist.
Here's another fun fact. Muhammad Ali, his original name was Cassius Clay, and when he converted to Islam, he called himself Muhammad Ali because he said, yeah, Cassius Slave, that's my slave name. Yet Cassius Clay, who he was named after, was a dedicated abolitionist and actually committed some very dangerous stunts to free slaves. So it's like Muhammad Ali.
And as far as Muslims are concerned, they're still enslaving people to this day.
Yeah,
in a lot of Muslim countries.
Muhammad is black slave. Name. Yeah.
Too bad he's dead, because I would have loved to bring that up to Muhammad Ali. It's like, yeah, but Muhammad Ali, you were named after an actual abolitionist who was very dedicated to his cause, and you joined a religion that condones slavery and still practices it. I mean, yeah, Christianity historically had slaves, but at least they reformed and said, okay, yeah, slavery's not good, is wrong. And to play the devil's advocate, some of the first abolitionists were branches of the Christian church that were saying, no, we're all equal under God, so slavery is wrong.
The very first ones, I think, were Quakers.
Yeah.
The Quaker church has always been fiercely abolitionist.
Oh, yeah, but...
How do you think these statue removers would react if the statue of Lenin in Seattle was taken down? If they even know who he is.
Going back to that old meme when they were trying to compare George Washington and Lenin, and said George Washington was this privileged white guy while Lenin was this hardworking person who was fighting for the people. It's like it mentions, well, did you know he was raised by two people who were formerly serfs? Yes, that's true, but Lenin himself was not born into serfdom. By the time he was born, his parents were long out of serfdom and actually were relatively successful people.
People in the chat, let me know how this video is going on. I'm getting a couple of alerts to drop frames. So if that's a problem, let me know. I'm not sure what I can do about it, but at least I'll know.
Yeah, that's a big thing that gets ignored about the Bolsheviks. Like, if you actually look at the Bolsheviks, ironically, you'll find out that the overwhelming majority of them actually came from well-off families, you know?
Oh, like Aunt Jemima. Aunt Jemima. People don't realize Aunt Jemima was an actual person. That wasn't her name, but, you know, they had hired her to represent the brand. But she actually was born a slave, and she had been free at that point because this was after the Civil War. But, I mean, she had learned, like, all the traditional country-style cooking. And so it wasn't just her image they were using. You know, they were sending her all over the country doing stuff. Of course, they didn't have TV at the time. They didn't have cooking shows. So she basically had a traveling cooking show where, you know, she would learn all the cooking techniques that, you know, she had developed, and she would do it, you know, under the name of Aunt Jemima. But, I mean, she was pretty much, you know, a celebrity. And, I mean, so much of the stuff, you know, she had created, and she, you know, made a lot of money doing that, you know, being the face of Aunt Jemima, and all the money she made, you know, on her cooking tours.
Kind of reminds me of the origins of Betty Crocker. And apparently, from what I read, Betty Crocker was actually a guy. He was, I can't remember his name, but he was a really good bakery and pastry chef and all that. And the reason why he went under the pseudonym Betty Crocker was because, and this is kind of a case of sexism going the other way. It was because a female friend of his told him, you know, listen, mister, you know, no housewife is going to want to take baking instructions from a man. So he pretended, oh, I'm not a man. I'm this, you know, sweet, you know, middle-aged, you know, housewife called Betty Crocker. And here's my cooking advice.
Well, and I mean, she was paid, of course, to hawk the Aunt Jemima products. And so she'd do a lot of cooking with them. But I mean, it was just like general cooking stuff, not just with their products. And so she basically had the equivalent of her own cooking show at the time.
Yeah, and I don't get the whole thing about Uncle Ben, because it's like, Uncle Ben, he, you know, I mean, I never
he wasn't even a slave, was he?
I don't know.
I don't remember his story.
Hold on, I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah,
look up Uncle Ben right quick, but I think he was later. Because, I mean, Aunt Jemima is, you know, it is an image from slavery, because household slaves were generally referred to as, you know, uncles and aunts. You know, the Uncle Remus books, that's where, you know, that comes from. The Uncle Remus character was a Gullah slave who was passing on Gullah versions of the stories, the legends that had come from West Africa.
Yeah.
And that was the preservation of those.
It is true. Uncle Ben was not a slave. In fact, actually, Uncle Ben, you know, the guy, you know, the image didn't actually come about till 1946. Granted, this is from Wikipedia, but Uncle Ben's was actually founded by the Mars Company that was owned. No, wait, not the Mars Company, but it was founded in Houston, and the marketing came because they met a guy who worked as a cook, you know, at a hotel called Frank Brown, and he was famous for his rice recipes because apart from being a cook, he also was a farmer, and he had really good quality rice. And the entrepreneur who was in charge of Uncle Ben's at the time, he liked it.
Yep.
Everyone's saying video looks fine.
Yeah.
And I've stopped answering questions on, you know, favorites or other things like that, Big Baller. I don't choose favorites, because I'll give you a different answer every time.
Yeah. Speaking of books, you know, I mean, I was watching that Simon Whistler video about top 10 books that were misinterpreted or saying that, and it's like he said that the short story, what was it, Harry Berenson or something, was actually a mockery of Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged. And I'm like, I'm looking it up, and I am not seeing that anywhere in the origins of the writing. And it's like he's trying to claim, well, you know, the guy who wrote it, you know, who wrote it again?
Who wrote what?
Harry Berenson or something, or
Harrison Bergeron?
Yeah, Harrison Bergeron.
Yeah, that was Kurt Vonnegut Jr.
Yeah, Kurt Vonnegut. Yeah, he said, well, Kurt Vonnegut was a socialist, and I looked it up, and it's like, it was with Kurt Vonnegut, it's sort of a yes and a no, because he did associate with left-wing groups, but he was more individualist, you know, basically. Like, if I recall correctly, he was a big individualist at the very least, I think the only reason he associated with the left-wing groups was simply because he didn't realize, like a lot of people at the time, that if you want to be an individualist, you have to support capitalism. That was back when the socialists were saying, oh no, socialism and communism is the real individualist ideology.
Well, and also there were just so many of those groups, that's kind of who you had to appeal to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Another one
thoughts on George Orwell's 1984.
Wait, it's that easy? Sorry, I saw.
What's that easy?
I saw a meme, and it was the political compass, and authoritarian left was, and it was like all the reactions to the 1984 book, and authoritarian left was wait, it's that easy?
Yeah. Thoughts on Funny thing, Inquisitor, about George Orwell's 1984 was because Simon Whistler was bringing it up in his books about books that eerily predicted the future, and one thing he was talking about was George Orwell's 1984 versus Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and he was saying, actually, we look more like Brave New World, because in Brave New World, everyone embraces, consumerism and sexual orientation and all that, and that's what we're seeing more. And I'm like, Whistler, you do ignore the part that the consumerist caste system is enforced by the global government in the book. Come on, I haven't even read Brave New World, and I can tell you that. Yeah.
But I mean, in 1984, it wouldn't have worked, because the whole idea is Newspeak is a very simplified language, and if you don't have the language to be able to express a complex thought, then even if you have a subversive thought, you can't pass it on to anyone else. You can't get a movement going. The problem is, people don't work that way, and there have been cases. I think I've read a couple of in South America and some other places, like, where they'd have kids who were, orphans, or with some sort of disability or whatever, and they put them off in a home where they were basically neglected. I mean, they gave them food and everything, but other than that, they were just left alone. And when, social workers came through to, try and, give these kids a better life, what they had found was that in a lot of cases, the kids in these homes had developed their own language and were speaking to each other in this completely new language. And they had to have linguists come in and figure it out and try to translate between that and English. I mean, that's what people do. We're just born to make a complex language and speak it. So.
Wasn't there a movie with Liam Neeson, kind of like that, where Liam Neeson plays that social worker who takes on that teenage girl, and she kind of speaks English, but it's like, this invented language that is mostly composed of like really, really deep Southern, slangs
well,
and whatnot.
I'm not sure about the movie you're talking about, but that's, what Creole languages are. Because I mentioned Uncle Remus a little bit ago, and a lot of people read that and go, oh, that's racist, because like the is spelled D-E and of is spelled O-B. And they're like, well, that's right. That's not racism. What he was doing was trying to render phonetically the Gullah language. And Gullah is a Creole language, primarily English, but also with some West African languages thrown in. And that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to preserve how it sounded, as much as possible.
Fun fact about Gullah. I was watching it was this good YouTuber about the history of certain TV shows, and it was talking about the old TV show from our childhood, Gullah Island. And I learned something interesting about the Gullah and Creole language. The pollywog in the show was called Binya Binya, and according to the research, Binya was actually named after a slang term in the Creole language, which is Binya, which means been here a long time, and that's used to describe someone who's been there for, who's like elderly or has been there for a while. They're called a Binya. Yeah, because it means been there a long time.
I mean, there's still Gullahs, and that was an actual Gullah family they had cast in that.
The creators of the show, that was why they created it, was to show them, all about the culture of these people that lived off that tiny island off the coast of, what was it, Carolina?
South Carolina. Well, kind of along the coast of South Carolina in the wetlands, where they were rice slaves, and there was a lot of malaria there at the time.
Yeah.
And black people are much more resistant to malaria than white people, so the slavers didn't like going in there. So basically, as long as they kept the rice output coming, they were basically left alone. to do what they want. So they still had to work in the fields and send out the rice, but they developed their own culture, their own language.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they had been taught English, they had been Christianized, but they had still kept, well, like the Uncle Remus legends. Like I said, those were West African folk legends that they were continuing to pass on.
That still kind of reminds me of that one SJW who was black, and she tried to learn all about her African heritage, and she found out that while physically she was black, genetically she was white. Yeah, she discovered she was white. Then she did a little research, and it turns out, oh yeah, her great grandma, she was black, but she married a white man. Yeah.
Animal Farm's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah,
and
like
there aren't very many people in this country who are purely black. Most of the black people in this country are a result of some blacks marrying whites in the past. So unless they're an actual African immigrant, they're probably not 100% black.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I've actually heard people saying, the fact, that a lot of modern blacks are brown, that's because they're actually of mixed race, because the reason why black people were called black people is because if you go to many parts of Africa, they literally do have black skin, but
it's really, really dark, yeah.
Yeah, really, really dark skin, but the reason why a lot of modern day African Americans have brown skin, that's from years of crossbreeding with various white people, usually the Irish Catholics,
I had a teacher in college, and she was black, and she was really cool. It was one of those where it was like a 300-seat lecture hall or something like that. So it was hard to get like an individual one-on-one. But I mean, she was great, and she'd kind of like call out, almost like how stand-up comics do crowd work and things like that. And so every time someone mentioned that they were on vacation, and she'd be like, "Did you get a tan?" And they'd say, "Yeah." And say, "All right, come up, let's compare." Because she was black, And so well, then she does it. And there's this one guy who calls it out. So he says, "Yeah." She says, "You get a tan?" He says, "Yeah, I got a good tan." And she says, "Well, let's compare." And he stands up and walks up towards the stage, and he is like 10 shades darker than she is.
Yeah.
So, because I mean, she was kind of brown. She wasn't like all the way, and this guy was almost all the way black.
Yeah. Hey, Shannon Inquisitor wants to know, what was your major in college?
My major was in art with a specialty in computer graphics, and I have minors in music and computer science.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, you didn't get a major in explaining how computers are a sign of white supremacy? Yeah. I can't believe we have classes like that. It's like there's all classes about how we're gonna study how how paper is white because white people made it.
Apparently, sleep is no.
Oh, did you hear? We can't say blacklist and whitelist anymore because that's racist.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
I've always said
really
person
dumb.
of color list.
Kind of reminds me of those feminists that were saying, "Oh no, we can't say like man this because that's sexism and all that." When many linguists are pointed out, actually, it comes from the word manos, which is a really old Greco-Latin word, and it just means to handle.
It means hand, yeah. It literally means hand.
Yeah, to handle. That's what it comes from.
Yeah, so like manual labor is labor you do with your hands.
Yeah, that's where.
Or like when they would say like man the lifeboats, that's where that comes from.
Yeah,
I mean, what are they gonna do with gendered languages?
Yeah, like Spanish.
German is really French. Weird for genders. I mean, that's just a crazy language.
Yeah, German in general is just weird.
Maybe we're going to end up like, sorry for bringing this up, but maybe we're going to be like in this one My Little Pony Friendship is Magic episode where they're trying to help, a friendship problem with this one race of beings, and they find out that they're all mute, but one who can talk explains that at one point, a mild argument turned into a war, and the beings felt that the best way to prevent all war was basically simple. Let's just become completely silent. Let's use a spell to make everyone be silent so nobody can talk, because if nobody talks, nobody will fight. But as you can tell, no one's not really getting along. It's just more of, they're basically like robots, basically, because they can't talk and exchange.
And Bradley also says some businesses got rid of the word master from master bedroom because it calls on to slavery. And they're doing the same thing with in computers. You have master slave, which is where you have two devices and one's controlling the other. The one that's controlling is called the master, and the one's the other one is the slave. So you can't say master slave anymore.
Well, if I recall correctly, master, it doesn't involve slavery. I mean, master just means superior. I think it means controller, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you master a subject, then you have good control over that subject.
Yeah.
That's
by the way, apparently some SJWs, and this is a real thing, they're saying math is racist because the concept of 2 + 2 = 4, that was invented by white men, even though modern day mathematics is a combined effort.
Actually, I think we probably most of our math we probably owe to the Indians.
Yeah.
Because yes, the Greeks came up with a lot of the classical math, but you had the Arabs kind of putting it all together. But the stuff they got, like what we call Arabic numerals and things like algebra and all that, that was all based on what Indians were doing.
Really?
Yep. If I recall correctly, one person said, cultural appropriation is the reason why we have mathematics, because the Indians developed symbols for the numbers. The Arabics, developed
the base 10 numbering system. Yeah.
Yeah, the Arabs. Yeah, the Arabs.
I mean, imagine trying to do all this with Roman numerals.
The Indians developed the symbols. The Persians and later the Ottomans and Arabs, figured out a way to organize them. And the Greeks and Latins were the ones who figured out how to do math stuff with them, like adding and subtracting and the like.
Well, and the Greeks figured out all sorts of stuff like geometry. The Arabs were primarily putting it all together because people don't realize that up to the 12th century, it was the Arab world that was the seat of learning. And, people came from, whatever countries, whether they were Christian or Muslim or, Indian or whatever. And they would all, come into the Arab world because that was the best opportunities for, academic learning and things like that. Yeah. And that's what they were doing, is they were taking all of these different techniques from, Greece and Rome and India and things like that, and putting it together into modern mathematics as we know it.
Oh, yeah. And actually, you pointed out to that one lady that, said that, we should stop teaching science because science is, and instead we should be teaching, voodoo witchcraft and whatnot because, science like electricity and all that, that's a white person thing. And you pointed out, actually, Africa played a role in some of the math we know about. Like, for instance, we get a lot of our geometry contents from the ancient Egyptians. They were some of the first people to come up with geometry.
And there was, before, slavery, there was a lot of trade with West Africa because they could make steel that was superior quality than the steel that was found in Europe.
Yep. Yeah,
I mean, we think about sub-Saharan Africa being, this poor third world country. I think that was primarily the Asani going around conquering everyone. They blame a lot of it on colonialism, and colonialism was bad, don't get me wrong, but I think the Asani had already, taken down a lot of the learning and everything before the Europeans got there.
The reason why a lot of Africa is dirt poor is because after a lot of the nations declared their independence, they said, okay, we're going to be these self-sustaining autocratic socialist economies, and basically said, we're going to, undo all the stuff of Western ideas, but that also meant that they got rid of, people that actually knew what they were doing, and now they were left with all this land and all. Then they're like, okay, how do we farm? It's like,
but it's funny because they're all being socialist, and Karl Marx was a white guy.
Yeah. And it's pretty funny. Yeah, and it's pretty funny because, this is what happened in Zimbabwe. They're like, okay, we've got all this farmland. Does anyone know how to farm? Well, the whites, the white Rhodesians knew how to farm. Well, why don't we ask them? Well, we can't. Why not? Because you killed them and exiled them all. Oh shit. Now what are we going to do?
I mean, Bradley, the Europeans were not great. I mean, look at the Zulu Wars and things like that. There was a lot of stuff that the Europeans did in Africa that was totally not great. So I am not in any way trying to absolve Europe of the crimes they committed in Africa. But I'm also saying that African tribes did a lot of it to each other as well.
Yeah. Well, and here's another thing. You know, a lot of those wars we hear about in colonialism, the irony is that there were quite a few colonial wars which weren't against the native Africans. They were actually against white people that wanted to settle in Africa. A perfectly good example is the Boer Wars. The Boers weren't a tribe of Africans; they were actually a tribe of white people who were of Dutch and German origin. And the British were like, "Oh no, these people are Dutch and German, so they're not loyal to the British Empire." So the British waged 2 wars against them. The first one,
it will be British colonies fighting Dutch colonies or whatever, and the Africans are like, "Well, why are you pulling us into this?"
Yeah, that's another thing too. It was often against other European powers. It was basically, like you said, it was basically the British saying, "We're declaring war on Germany, so we're going to take the German colonies." The Germans were like, "Well, no, we're going to use these black, conscripts to fight you," and the British are like, "Well, so are we." Yeah.
Yes, Europeans did a lot of destruction, to the continent, but they also gave them a lot of benefits, and so it would have been nice, if they had kept a lot of those benefits and just, kicked out the guys who were doing it. But I mean, they kind of said, "Oh well, all this good stuff is associated with the white man, so we're going to get rid of it as well," and that didn't work out.
That's the thing that that's another thing that really irks me, is because I was reading about people that were trying to prove examples of capitalism and private property being there, and they were trying to use the Congo Free State and say, "Look at all this bad stuff that was happening, because because it was the private property of the king, and there was all these private companies doing all this." And I'm like, "Yeah, but that's just it. It was owned by the king." And they're like, "No, it wasn't owned by the government, because it was owned by the king personally, so the government couldn't intervene." It's like, he was the government. The king, he may not have a lot of powers, but he's still an acting member of government.
Yeah, yep. It's like that one quote from the Emperor in Star Wars. "I am the Sith."
Yeah, he wasn't that powerful, but he's still a monarch, and that's the thing people fail to realize. Monarchs, even modern ones, they still have more power than you think they do. Everyone knows I'm with Kit, and he lives in the UK, and he did say if the Queen wanted to, she could easily disassemble Parliament and replace it with, parliamentary and House of Lords that are more loyal to her, but she chooses not to for obvious reasons.
And Bradley talks about the Arab slave trade, and that was horrible. And actually, so much of the fighting that's going on there now is between Africans who are Muslims, Africans who are Christians, Africans who are traditional, African with the spiritualist religions, and African socialists. So I mean, they're all fighting each other because they've still got.
That's the sad truth, is that Africa is screwed no matter who wins. And it's pretty funny, because going back to the Congo, a lot of people like to talk about the Congo crisis of the 1960s, and they love to demonize the German and Belgian mercenaries that fought in there. But from what I read, the Belgian and German mercenaries actually were doing largely good things in the Congo crisis, whereas the UN was messing everything up. Because here's the thing, the contrary to popular belief, the mercenaries weren't in the Congo in the 1960s because these rich European corporations hired them. They were being hired by various, leaders of towns and all that were saying, look, our nation is falling apart to disease and civil war, and, and we're screwed no matter who wins. So can you protect us, from these crazy people that want to annex us? And then the UN came in and said, "Oh, those are mercenaries and they're white colonialism," and they got rid of them. And then what happened? The radicals took over and they destroyed everything. That's a sad case. It's like, people are like, every time there's a civil war, they're always like, well, we have to pick a side. And I'm like, dude, that country's screwed no matter who wins. Perfectly good example is Syria, because if the Syrians win, guess what? Assad stays in power, and while he has done some good stuff, he's still a Russian stooge and an a-hole. But if the rebels win, congratulations, ISIS takes over.
Yeah.
Either that or the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yep. you know, when people ask me what's my opinion of Syria, I'm like, you know, as cynical as it is, the best thing that can happen for Syria is the rebels and the Syrian government, they need to destroy each other so the people can rebuild from the ground up. And the truth is, that usually is what happens. I mean, that's kind of what happened in Somalia was, you know, the Bahrain regime overextended its limit and a minor civil war occurred and the warlords and the Bahrain government destroyed each other and people were trying to rebuild everything from the ground up and it was working. But then the UN said, oh no, you guys got to have a government. And they opened up, you know, the opportunities for the warlords to regain power.
And Bradley McPhee. But the United Nations is there to help the world, yeah. The United Nations is still doing a lot of horrible stuff in Africa. I've covered all sorts of stuff on the podcast, like how they're stopping Africans from getting GMO crops that could really help them, things like that.
Oh, yeah, and, and, you know, in many of their humanitarian missions, they're putting, you know, they're trying to, they're trying to bring peacekeepers in there by deploying, you know, Guyanan and Senegalese troops, you know, saying, oh, these guys are fellow Africans, so they'll know what they're doing. And what did those Guyanan and Senegalese UN troops did? They took advantage of their status and began raping and stealing from the locals. Yeah. You know, by the way, a lot of people love to blame the Rwandan genocide on, like, the United States, but it's like, no, the Rwandan genocide occurred because of the United Nations, because they demanded that the Hutu radicals be given equal say in the government.
Well, it was ultimately the result of the Belgians, because I can't remember which is which. You got the Hutus and the Tutsis, and I can't remember which, but They were just there before the Belgians meddled. They were basically different tribes, but I mean they got along. And then the Belgians, I think it was the Hutus. The Belgians convinced the Tutsis, whichever one it is. They convinced them that they were superior and the other people were inferior, and they deserved to rule. And that kind of started all of this. And then, so I think like the Tutsis started fighting the Hutus, and then the Hutus, you know, fought the Tutsis and took over or something like that. It ended up being a big Indian, little Indian kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was Belgium that was primarily responsible for that.
You know, I think the funny irony, Shane, is that that's the reason why the American Revolution is so talked about, because it's one of the first, you know, revolutions that, while there were some shortcomings, it didn't eat itself up, because we see that with a lot of revolutions, like once they take power, they become the thing that they sought to destroy. Like, you know, we saw with the
when America did that, they said, hey, let's write down a declaration saying what the principles are behind our separation and what we want to do. And generally, you know, they don't do that. They just, you know, they overthrow the government, and then they go, now what? Because, I mean, so much about the American Revolution, and especially Lafayette went back to France, you know, to help inspire, you know, the revolution over there, but they didn't do that, so they cut the heads off of all the royalty and aristocrats and basically the only people who know how to produce anything.
Yep.
But then they say, okay, now what are we going to do? Well, let's give power to this guy named Robespierre. Well, that didn't work out so well, did it? Okay, so we got to cut off his head. Now what? Now who's going to put in charge? Hey, how about this Napoleon guy?
Yeah, I know. I saw.
What could go wrong?
I saw a joke like that one time where a girl's reading about, you know, a historical fiction that takes place during the French Revolution, and she's like, "Oh, just imagine all those starving workers who take up arms against their evil, oppressive government and overthrow a bad government." And her friend's like, "Yeah, but didn't the French Revolution lead to the rise of Robespierre, who was a tyrant? Then he got deposed and he was replaced by an incompetent council, and they ran their economy in the ground, and fearing that the British were going to take advantage of it. And then someone said, hey, I know this Corsican general in the French, this Corsican corporal in the French military called Napoleon. He has an idea, and he defeats the British in a battle. And they're like, will you take over the government? And they're like, sure.
Well, and one of the biggest injustices in history is the fact that Marie Antoinette is associated with all of that, when in fact, I mean, executing Marie Antoinette was about the worst they could have done. No, I mean, she was actually an advocate for them.
Yeah, she did. You know, contrary to popular belief, she wasn't this stupid airhead, you know, that was like, oh, they can't eat bread. Well, why can't they just eat cake? No, she
She didn't say that. She didn't say that. It was what was it? It was Rousseau, I believe, who that combat that, and he had just said like some princess from the past or something, and he didn't name her, and it might have even been completely hypothetical.
Yeah.
And then later on, it got applied to Marie Antoinette, but she never said that. She never would have said that. She completely understood it. And here's a fun fact. Here's her last words were an apology to her executioner because she accidentally stepped on his hand.
Oh yeah.
That's the kind of person she was.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually read that that when she was executed, it was actually pretty silent because, and I've actually heard many people in the crowd were starting to wonder, maybe we were wrong to kill her because she was very quiet and she was very dignified. And like you said, when she stepped on the executioner's foot and he screamed in pain, she actually helped him up and said, "I'm very sorry, Monsieur. I didn't intend to do that." And they were like, wow, I mean, Louis the 14th or whatever, screw him, but Marie Antoinette, I don't know. I've actually heard the only reason why they executed her wasn't even because she was a royal, rather it was because she was originally Austrian, and Austrians were the mortal enemies of the French on both sides. Both sides hated the Austrians.
I don't know, but that was about the worst thing they could have done.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
she went along with the execution because she felt, that would help. If that would help give them the power and that would help, give them control over their lives, and that was worth giving her life for.
Yeah.
So that was about that was like her. She was like their biggest ally.
Yeah.
And
actually another good example of that is Tsar Nicholas II. A lot of people like to portray him as like this uber conservative who wanted to keep the status quo, but from what I've seen, Tsar Nicholas was actually a sympathetic guy who did sympathize with his people, but he felt like there was nothing he could do about it because he was trying to keep his son from dying, who had severe hemophilia. And actually, from what I actually read somewhere that said he did not want to go to war with World War I. He did not want to go with World War I. In fact, he was contemplating, actually letting, saying that Russia, going back on his promise to Serbia and saying, look, this issue with Austria is none of Russia's business. It's between you and them. But his advisors saying, no, the Serbs are fellow Slavs and Russia has to stand up for the Slavs. And he declared war with great reluctance.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was pretty, small p progressive for his time.
And here's
Bolshevik Revolution was probably about the worst thing they could have done.
Yeah, that's another thing I've actually asked, like, communists. It's like, why did they have to execute the Tsarina and her kids? What did they do to the people? And the only excuse that they can come up with is, well, the Czech Legion was on their way and they were going to use them to reestablish the monarch. And I'm like, that's not an excuse. Yeah, just exile them. And here's the thing: if the Tsar was as bad of a person as people say he was, bring him to Moscow and put him on trial. Give him a fair trial. That would actually be a really big advantage for you guys to prove you're more civilized. It's like, you see, look how civilized we are. The Tsar is the most evil person. He's worse than the devil himself, but we're still going to give him a fair trial. They didn't do that. They just, when they captured him, they asked Lenin saying, okay, we've got the Tsar and his family. What should we do? And they're just like, kill him. And it wasn't even like they did it mercifully. They bayoneted his family to death, basically.
Yep. Oh, I mean, it was brutal. And then, of course, they're talking about, the Tsar has killed his own people. Well, what did Lenin turn around and do?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Many people who say the Tsar killed his own people, they refer to a riot that occurred in 1905. Here's the thing. The Tsar wasn't present when that happened. He was actually in his vacation house trying to treat his son Alexei, who had severe hemophilia, and it was actually carried out by his advisor. And when he heard that his advisor ordered the Russian imperial military to shoot at the crowd, he was actually disgusted and called it a tragedy.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, 2 minutes left. Let's see if we can wrap it up with some final thoughts. Anyone? Clash's Pride, I don't think you've had much to say so far. You got anything on your mind?
Well, I actually do have a video that I'm probably gonna send to you later. It's actually it's by I think it's an ANCOM, Libertarian Socialist, something like that. Talking about your death toll to capitalism.
No, yeah, there have been a few responses to that, and it's basically like basically they're trying to claim things like the military is capitalist. It's like, oh, that's not capitalism.
And then, do you mind if I talk about a book that just recently came out?
Go ahead.
All right. So somebody reached out to me and told me about a book that he wrote. I think he's for the Mises Institute. His name is Michael Hoffman, and he wrote a book called Monetary Kaleidics, and it's very. He is an Austrian economist, but he has a lot of beliefs that are very unorthodox for Austrian economics, and I just started reading it, and I actually enjoy it, and I just want to get it out there. It's on Amazon if anyone wants to buy it.
Okay. Yeah. Brantley says, is it true that the 260 million deaths to socialism is inflated? That's to all governments during the 20th century, not just the socialist ones. But I mean, a lot of more socialists.
I still love the people that try to say, well, capitalism killed 1 billion people, and they list all these examples where it's that wasn't capitalism. That was a government doing that.
Yeah.
Like a good example,
Vega.
Like a good example, I'll say real quickly is like one person mentions the banana wars and all that. It's like, it wasn't the United Fruit Company that was killing those striking workers. That was the United States Marine Corps.
Yep. Vega, any parting thoughts before we go?
Just like to say happy birthday, Shane, and
thank you.
Looking forward to your answering my question this month.
Okay. And Chris, anything to leave us off with?
No, nothing.
All right. Well, thanks everyone so much for watching and participating. Everyone who participated in the chat, everyone who donated on Patreon and Subscribestar and came into the voice chat and gave us a whole bunch of stuff to talk about. And everyone, of course, who's watching this, please hit like, subscribe, and the bell, and share this video and all the videos on my channel, everywhere to anyone you think would be interested in them. Please go to donate.bogosity.tv to see other ways you can support this channel. Thank you so very much, and until next time, stay strong and be free.